welcome to Live Interactive English. I'm Nina.
And I'm Matt. And today we're looking at part 2 of our story, Rip Van Winkle.
Yes.
So in part 1, we learned that Rip Van Winkle was living in America at the time when it was still a British colony.
Indeed.
And he was known for his kindness and his desire to help others. Except he didn't help his wife around the house, and she thought he was very lazy.
Yes, but one day he went to escape from her yelling and complaining, and he ran into a strange man calling his name.
And that man was wearing, well, he was strange because he was wearing old-fashioned clothing. So old-looking clothes. And he took, well, Rip offered to help him carry a heavy keg, which they then carried, through a ravine from which there was a loud thunder-like noise coming from it.
Yes.
And finally, they reached a space which was like an amphitheater, and some other strange old men were bowling there.
Yeah, they were. They were dressed the same way as the other guy, and they were bowling. I don't know. If it were me, if I were Rip, I don't think I would follow a random stranger to a random place, especially one that knew my name.
Well, I think Rip's made the right choice here because it started off, he was just trying to get away from his wife and just walk around the woods, but now he's found a cool party, and who doesn't like bowling? It sounds like a great time. Bowling in the woods, I'd like to try it, so if I ever see a strange old man, I'll go with him.
All right, so let's find out what actually happens to Rip. Hopefully he doesn't get kidnapped, right?
Right, well, I guess we'll have to get into part 2 to find out.
When nobody was looking, Rip began drinking from the keg until he fell into a deep sleep. When he woke, he discovered his gun was rusty and his dog had disappeared. Stranger still, he realized his beard had grown long and gray. Bewildered, Rip went back to the village, only to find it transformed. Old buildings had fallen and new ones had been built. The streets were full of unfamiliar people. They stared at him and wore clothing that Rip had never seen before. After entering the village inn, Rip noticed something else strange. A painting of King George III had been replaced with an image of someone else. Above the picture, a plaque read, General Washington. Soon, Rip learned that 20 years had passed and America was now free of British rule. He also discovered that his children were all grown up.
Welcome back. So where we left off in part 1, Rip had just gotten to this place where these strangely dressed old men were bowling.
Yes, so I wonder what happens next. Let's get into the story. When nobody was looking, Rip began drinking from the keg until he fell into a deep sleep. So when nobody was looking, so he drank from the keg without permission.
Yeah, well, he did help carry the keg there. So
True.
Maybe he's entitled to a little bit of what's inside.
I don't know if he should have done that without asking still. Also, he doesn't know what's inside the keg.
Yeah, as far as we know, he doesn't know what's in the keg, but maybe he was just very thirsty.
Yeah, and it sounds like it probably tasted good because he drank enough to
drank until he fell asleep. So, yeah, we don't know how much it took for him to fall asleep, but maybe it was a lot.
All right. When he woke, he discovered his gun was rusty and his dog had disappeared. Stranger still, he realized his beard had grown long and gray. That sounds very weird and creepy. So his gun had gone rusty. What's rusty?
So rusty means something is affected by rust, and rust is the reddish brown coloring that is on metals after they've been exposed to elements, after they've oxidized. So metals like iron and steel, if they're untreated and left outside, they will become rusty and turn brown, the brownish reddy color. So his gun has somehow, overnight become rusty, become old.
Which is actually very difficult. So it seems like usually when something becomes rusty, it takes some time, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
And he didn't just realize that his gun had gone rusty, but also his beard had grown.
But right now we have another example sentence for rusty. It's on the beach was a rusty old boat that clearly hadn't been used in years. So maybe the gun, I don't know how it, he was just using it. How could it become rusty?
That is very weird.
Okay, continuing with our story. Bewildered, Rip went back to the village, only to find it transformed.
What's bewildered?
Okay, so bewildered is a word that means just very confused. So he's woken up and his dog's gone, his beard's long, his gun's rusty. So he's very confused and doesn't have an understanding of what is happening.
So he went back to his village and only to find it transformed. So in this case, to transform something is to change completely into something different. So it was changed. For example, the parking lot was transformed into a beautiful park. So I wonder what happened to the old village.
Right, so he's gotten there and it's nothing like it was before. So something has happened, everything has changed. And is it all because of this drink he drank?
Let's find out. Old buildings had fallen and new ones had been built. The streets were full of unfamiliar people. They stared at him and wore clothing that Rip had never seen before. Okay, so it seems like old buildings were not there anymore. There are new buildings and there are new people. And everyone was staring at him because maybe he was the person that was wearing differently, was dressing differently than the others.
Maybe he got lost and accidentally went to the wrong village.
Let's find out.
After entering the village inn, Rip noticed something else strange. A painting of King George III had been replaced with an image of someone else.
So it had been replaced, which means to take the place of something or to put something new in its place. So it was changed with something else. For example, to eat healthier, we should replace all of the potato chips in this cupboard with dried fruit. So it sounds like he came back at a different time.
Maybe. Well, so King George III is what he expected to be there, and King George III was the king of England. Well, at the time he thinks he's in, at least. So, at the time when at the end of the British colonial era, or at the end of the time when America was a part of Britain. Okay, so continuing with the article, above the picture, a plaque read, General Washington.
Okay, so above the picture, the plaque, a plaque is like a tablet usually made out of metal or wood that's fixed onto a wall or something else, and it generally gives you more information about something or someone.
So it's telling you that this painting is of General Washington, and you may have heard of General Washington because his name is George Washington, and he was the first president of the United States after they became an independent country. So they were no longer a British colony.
All right.
Continuing on, soon Rip learned that 20 years had passed and America was now free of British rules. So wait, so 20 years have passed since he went to the bowling party.
Wow.
So,
do you still think that was a good idea?
Wow, it must have been a pretty good party if it took him 20 years to recover.
Okay.
Okay. Continuing on, he also discovered that his children were all grown up.
That is such a mysterious situation. He followed this random person and came back only 20 years later. All right.
Well, that's very mysterious. And I wonder how that could have happened. What kind of magic made him miss 20 years of his life? Maybe we'll find out after the break.
Okay. Hello， 大家好，我是 Hanny， 今天要继续来读 Rip Van Winkle 李伯大梦的故事。那李伯趁着没有人在看的时候，开始喝起了酒桶里面的酒，直到他陷入沉睡。那当他醒来的时候，发现他的枪生锈了，狗狗不见了。更奇怪的是，他的胡子变长变灰白了。李伯很困惑。那他回到村庄，却发现村庄已经完全变了样，建筑不一样了，街上也到处都是陌生人，穿着也是他以前从来没有见过的衣服。那么李伯走进村里的客栈后，就注意到其他奇怪的事情，像乔治3世国王的画像被别人的画像取代了。那幅画上面有一个牌匾，写着 General Washington 华盛顿将军。然后很快的，他就得知已经过了20年了，美国现在已经脱离英国的统治，然后他也发现他的孩子都已经长大了。好，单字 rusty 是形容生锈的，那去掉 y 变成 rust 当名词表示锈，当动词表示生锈。Matt 老师在解释单字时有提到 oxidize 这个字 oxidize oxidize 表示使氧化生锈的意思。下一个单字 transform 表示使彻底改观，使改头换面。replace 则表示替换，以什么取代。replace A with B 就表示把 A 换成 B， 用 B 来取代 A。那这边有2个重点，我们进入文法时间。我们来看第一个重点是过去完成式 had 加上过去分词 PP， 这是用来表示在过去某个时间点或是某个动作之前就已经完成的经验或动作，常常会搭配过去简单式使用，用来指2个动作的先后顺序。先发生的动作用过去完成式，后发生的动作用过去简单式。例如 Jenny had read the book before she saw the movie. Jenny 在看那部电影之前已经看过书了，所以这边动作顺序就是先看过书，用过去完成式 had read， 然后才看电影，所以用过去简单式 saw。好，第2个重点是 only to 加原形动词，这表示结果却怎么样，不料怎么样。那用法是要接在子句的后面，表达结果出乎意料之外，令人惊讶或者是失望。例如 They took a taxi to the restaurant only to find it fully booked. 他们搭计程车去那间餐厅，结果却发现它被订满了。好，接着课文中。
Though his wife had died many years before, Rip was happy with his new life. He spent his days napping in the shade and telling his story to anyone who would listen. From then on, whenever there was thunder, the people of the village would say it was the sound of the mountain men playing ninepins again.
Welcome back. So before the break, we learned that Rip Van Winkle had awoken with a long beard, a rusty gun, and no dog. And then he had been, very confused by this, so he returned to his village only to find that it had transformed. There were new buildings where there used to be old buildings. There were new streets, new things, new people that he didn't recognize. And then he eventually found out, because he saw in the village inn that there was a picture of George Washington instead of King George III, and that led him to find out that 20 years had passed and that America was no longer a British colony.
Yeah, that is wild. So he realized that it had been 20 years and his kids had all grown, right?
So he missed his children's childhood.
Okay, let's find out more. Though his wife had died many years before, Rip was happy with his new life. All of this because she complained too much. So he's happy even though she's gone.
Well, it seemed that was the only bad thing in his life before.
All right. He spent his days napping in the shade and telling his story to anyone who would listen.
Okay, so he's napping in the shade. So the shade means an area of comparative darkness or an area where sunlight doesn't directly hit. So if you're outside and you're relaxing in the shade, you might be under a nice tree that blocks the sunlight. So for example, let's find some shade to escape the hot sun.
Oh yes, definitely a must. Like when you're at the beach, you always want an umbrella for shade, right? Continuing with the story. From then on, whenever there was thunder, the people of the village would say it was the sound of the mountain men playing nine pins again.
Okay, so they now know, or they at least think that whenever you hear thunder, it must be another bowling party.
Yeah, so I think if you do hear a bowling party going on, you don't want to go there unless you want 20 years of your life gone.
Well, I don't know. Rip seems pretty happy. So yeah, we have a what do you think question here, Nina. So why do you think Rip is happy with his new life?
Well, I think it's because he no longer has to do chores around the house. But yeah, I think that's the main reason. He can relax and be lazy. But I wonder what the moral of this story is.
I think it's that if you get invited to a party by strangers, you should go because it'll make you happy in the future. You might miss a few years, but when you get there, you're going to be very happy with your new life.
Or sometimes, the adventure is with the unknown, maybe.
See, I think it's that you have a good adventure and then you'll have good stories to tell in the future. And that's why Rip is happy, because he gets to sit in the shade and tell his stories because he has these adventure stories from his past.
Okay, maybe. Well, it's definitely a very interesting story. We hope you enjoyed it.
Okay, see you guys next time.
All right, bye. 李伯的妻子在多年前就过世了，但是李伯对他的新生活很满意，天天都在树荫下打盹儿。那么对着任何愿意聆听故事的人呢，他都会说给他听。在那之后，每当打雷的时候，村里的人就会说啊，那是山里的男子在玩九柱球的声音。好，那单字 shade 当名词，它表示阴凉处或者是树荫的意思。那这边一个重点，我们进入文法时间。这边我们来区分 before和 ago 的差别。before 和 ago 都可以当副词，接在表示一段时间的名词后面，用来表达什么什么之前，但是两者的基准点不同。before 的使用情境呢，是以过去的某个时刻来当基准，然后表示说从当时再往前推一段时间。例如2 days before 表示那个时刻的2天前。至于 ago 的使用情境呢，是以现在为基准，表示从现在往回推一段时间。像3 years ago 就表示从现在回推3年前。我们来看两个例句。Lila and I became friends last year, but we had met a year before. 我跟 Lila 去年成为朋友，但我们在前一年就见过彼此了。We met at a party 2 years ago. 我们2年前在一个派对上认识的。好，那么以上节的讲解，同学别走开，马上回来哦。
When nobody was looking, Rip began drinking from the keg until he fell into a deep sleep. When he woke, he discovered his gun was rusty and his dog had disappeared. Stranger still, he realized his beard had grown long and gray. Bewildered, Rip went back to the village, only to find it transformed. Old buildings had fallen and new ones had been built. The streets were full of unfamiliar people. They stared at him and wore clothing that Rip had never seen before. After entering the village inn, Rip noticed something else strange. A painting of King George III had been replaced with an image of someone else. Above the picture, a plaque read, General Washington. Soon, Rip learned that 20 years had passed and America was now free of British rule. He also discovered that his children were all grown up. Though his wife had died many years before, Rip was happy with his new life. He spent his days napping in the shade and telling his story to anyone who would listen. From then on, whenever there was thunder, the people of the village would say it was the sound of the mountain men playing ninepins again.
Hey, it's Kiwi on the street.
I'm Kiki.
And I'm Winnie.
Winnie, yesterday I was texting someone and I think they were talking to me about babies because they were typing something and they said BBS and I have no idea what that means.
Well, Kiki, it says, I'm going to the supermarket, I'll BBS. Be back soon. It's an abbreviation.
Oh, okay. Looks like it's time to brush up on some abbreviations.
Let's work on some abbreviations. Our first one is PIC. What could that be?
Picture.
A person in charge.
I see. It's for picture or
Yeah.
picnic. No, is it?
Picture. Picnic. Picture.
Oh,
Ding, ding, ding. Picture. Please send me that pic, okay? All right, the next one. PPL.
People.
People.
I don't know. Is it people?
Very good, people. Okay. TY.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I give you a present, you say...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay! Thank you. Okay, what did we learn today?
Let's work on some abbreviations. Our first one is PIC. Picture. Picture. So for example, you could say, can you help me take a picture? Or if we use another way of saying PIC, we also have person in charge. Person in charge. So that means someone who is the boss or the manager or someone who calls the shots at an office or a school. So you could say, who is the person in charge at this office? Next, we have PPL. People. People. So for example, you could say, how many people are in this room? And last but not least, we have TY. Thank you. Thank you. So you could say, thank you for the perfect gift. That's all we have for today. Kiwi later.